Welcome again to today's webinar, Leaders Bring the Weather, exploring the hidden impact leaders have on teams. We are thrilled to have you with us today for this conversation about how every leader, whether they intend to or not, creates the conditions that shape the culture, the engagement, and the performance around them. Leading the conversation today is Tyson Andrus, principal, consultant, and executive coach at Leadership Circle. Tyson has built a career helping leaders navigate complexity so that they can lead with greater clarity, confidence, and effectiveness. He partners with and coaches senior leaders and teams around the world to strengthen their capacity, guide transformational change, and turn insight into action. He also serves as a lead faculty member for Leadership Circle, certifying coaches and consultants in our tools and framework and helping leaders at all levels evolve the conscious practice of leadership. Whether he's coaching execs, teaching fellow coaches, or facilitating leadership teams, Tyson helps leaders see themselves, see each other, and see their organizations in new and meaningful ways. Tyson, it is great to see you and welcome you. Thank you so much for joining us and for doing this with us today.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And love seeing the chat of why people are here as we're getting into this topic around leaders bring the weather. It's something that I actually bring into most check-ins to the team I am with. So the setup is very simple of what weather are you bringing today? So as we start to dive into the topic, just a couple of things. So I'll bounce back and forth between some slides and just some conversation. So as we jump into what weather are you bringing today, this is just a little bit of notes around that every leader shapes the climate around them. What can happen for a lot of us is, well, maybe I'm not the leader of the room, or I have just a little small note of the room. How I like to hold leadership is not how many direct reports I have, but how am I deploying myself into circumstance to create outcomes that matter. So if I am deploying myself to create an outcome that matters, it's not about whether I have influence over the people or my people. It's how am I influencing them. So what are we talking about when we talk about weather? This actually comes from something that I have heard for a lot of my life, was just tend to bring in a weather system into whatever room you show up into. So the experience people have when we show up is the weather pattern we bring. Rarely do people have visibility into our intention. They mostly just experience the external environment that we bring. So what brings some of those external environments actually starts with an internal note of self, of what assumptions am I holding? What are some of the beliefs that I tend to hold as I step into the room? And I was seeing notes from those of people checking in just around some of you here as you're about to shift context. Some of you are here leading just some of your teams. One of the things that I found is really powerful when we think about what's my impact or what weather am I bringing is actually at first to be able to know what are the beliefs I hold about the room I am stepping into. For example, she was just with a leader, and I'll come back to this slide, but like I said, I'll bounce in and out of slide. Was just with a leader that was holding the assumption that about every 3 to 4 years, people find that person out, meaning they'll find out that they are not good enough, not talented enough, so that they need to start looking around for a new job about every 3 to 4 years before they get found out. That has impact. What was interesting is I was just by fate, their coach at the 3-year mark, and you could feel them starting to get a little bit antsy and started to tell me more and more in our coaching conversations that people were liking him less and less. What was noticed inside of that wasn't present in the first conversation, was just this almost scan for why people were not starting to like him. So holding that belief around 3 years, people will find me out. He brought it to life. So it got to also be with the team. And I'll do a little bit of reenactment of this leader. It's about that 3-year mark. They would come into the call, open up the call, and it shifted even just across a few months from present to this, to this, to this. That belief that people were going to like him less and less and less started to also author his behavior. So what energy are we creating or bringing into the room is also an important note of the weather system we are bringing. What behavior, what others see and hear, and then what do you activate in the room? So as you see this leader go in here, imagine you're the room. Go ahead, open up chat. When you see someone go more and more down like this and start to look like they get less and less interested, what activates you? What comes up in your mind? What stories might you be telling yourself? If you didn't know that internal story, what might be the story you're telling yourself about that person? Not engaged, do not care. What else? I'm not important enough. Absolutely. Take it personally, not interested in me, frustrated, not paying attention, don't respect everyone's time, disappointed in our progress. Oh, I love these. Yeah. Well, if you don't want to be here, why should I be here? Nice. I'm boring. Yeah, if they're doing it while I'm talking, lazy, not passionate about the material. Listen to all that gets filled in with the weather that we bring. Really, really well done. I love that chat. Because that just shows how much what we bring into the weather, people tend to fill it in with their assumption. I've always talked about when we leave a gap between intent and impact, people tend to fill that in with less than generous assumption. So what this chain of what's my weather, what's my assumption, what's my energy, what behavior am I bringing, and what's the reaction I'm creating in the room is a good systemic noticing of self. I do not have to have direct reports in the room that I am in to have impact. Yeah, Boris, love that. And the perception starts to become reality. Love confirmation bias, right? Once we start to see it, it starts to become more and more real. And same for that leader. They started to confirm more and more real. See, people are liking me less and less, but they are also fostering that weather system, that pattern. So as we're thinking about how to get in that and be able to open that for a leader, what I love about the leadership circle profile is it is a way in for us to understand the internal assumptions that are operating, some of the systems that are operating for us also externally, to be able to say, okay, where do I believe I'm coming from? What are some of the beliefs and assumptions that operate from that? And also, what is my impact? So one really quick way in from the leadership circle around this is being able to help us see, well, what structure of mind do I tend to come from? And it's not what's bad about me, what's good about me when we talk about reactive and creative. It's really this system of a reactive structure of mind tends to come from a place of holding things as problem and threat. And we can absolutely get results from things being held as problem and threat. Lots of results. But it also has lots of impact. So for this leader that we're talking about, the problem and threat was around this 3-year mark, I'm going to probably run out of my currency with this group. So the fear starts to get bigger and bigger as the time horizon holds in that 3 to 4 year mark. And then the reaction was the checking, what looked like physically checking out. We can also get results at work with the reactive system of just being able to think about something as a problem and threat going, uh-oh, I have to turn this around. For example, I'll grab a sales team. A sales team starting to hit its end of quarter can hold things as if we do not reach this number, it's going to reflect poorly on us. That can be quite the fear engine to start to go harder, faster, stronger. And they're harder, faster, stronger. They had less weekend time, less time in the evening, less time in the morning to go harder, faster, and stronger to reach their sales target. Got results. But also, if that's our primary fuel source is a reactive system, that it can also have its cost. So as you think about zooming this out, if this was, knowing this gets results and human beings are designed to get results, if this is our system, let's say reactive structure of mind, if we tend to hold things like problem, threat, and move that into fear, move that into reaction, zoom out to your own leadership, zoom out to the rooms that you've been in. If that's the primary model of operating, what have been some of the weather systems that you have seen? So go ahead, jump into chat. If that reactive system is the one that's very alive, what do you see? Chaos. Becky, good. Yeah, Heather, anxiety. What else shows up? Low morale, infighting, stress, frustration, decisiveness, defensiveness. Yeah, anger, spinning, stormy days, big time stormy days. Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, one of my kids' favorite movies for sure. Yeah, conflicting priorities, low trust, lack of psychological safety, reactionary behaviors, of course. One of the most true things about the stormy weather of reactive, and again, it's not what's bad about us, it just can make sense because we're stuck in a problem threat mindset, and it's how we survive through that. If we hold that, it's all about survival. Reactive invites reactive. So if my survival mechanism is to go harder, faster, and stronger, less time to breathe, I'll probably invite a weather pattern in the people that I am with. Yeah, and I love this. If you know the solution to the trouble, make the troops move. Right. So then that goes, let's get this going. It's not all reactive is all in that negative loop only. There's a reason why we hold on to them. Talk about reactive being full of stories of course. There's something that I can really hold on to about them. And actually, the sales team I would be thinking about when I talk about that reactive side is when I showed them that left-hand side, they said, isn't that life? Isn't that work? The thing that got really sticky about that pattern is that there was no other way to operate. So they'd be stuck in a cycle and it'd be very hard to expand beyond that. And that note of individual survival rather than team-centered absolutely popped up as well. So what we like to also hold is this creative structure of mind can hold space for the problem and the threat, but it actually expands it into a place of purpose and vision. So for this team that I'd be thinking about, one of the things that they did is they moved and noticed that the sales target was held as a problem and a threat. So what they did is they moved it to a place of, do we really know what we're up to as a company? One of the things that they really landed on was that they needed to have a courageous conversation with the senior team. And in that senior team conversation, opened up a really good conversation for the senior LT and that sales team around what the purpose of the sales truly, truly was. And they were in a medical device company. And one of the things that they really landed on is they were not connected to the customer around what it meant to save lives. And so they operated from that structure of mind of holding it as purpose and vision, which made them more passionate, and they operated from a place of action. So the reactive and creative is not an either or system. It's more of how can I operate in a way that I can ask, where's my center of gravity? Do I tend to operate from a place of purpose and vision that holds space for problem and threat? Or do I tend to operate from a place of only problem and threat, which has a very hard time holding space for purpose and vision? So as we're here, I'm just reading some of the chat. This is such good conversation. So how to get to the core? If people stay in the current status quo and not buying into the vision, there will be no passion. Only way is what? So let's lean into this. So as we're in this dichotomy, what can feel like a dichotomy versus creative holds complexity for the reactive, let's keep going. And this can help us expand some of the conversation. So as we're thinking about where we're at in that creative and reactive, context is also an important note. When we think about what pressure am I under, there's complexity, uncertainty, change, and ambiguity. As that opens up, that tends to invite a more reactive system of how do I survive through complexity. Tend to operate from a place of uncertainty, change, and ambiguity. When that opens up, the reactive tends to whisper to us a little bit of, here, let me help you survive this. So what comes online by default tends to be that reactive state if we're not in a space of intention. And then we start to foster the climate of what others experience from us when pressure arises. So weather's not created in a vacuum. Leaders bring the weather, but various pressures tend to invite our reactive tendencies to come save the day. And Vivian, I love the note of can we discuss how we can operate from a creative state? Really, absolutely. We'll keep getting into that as we keep going. Good. Such a fun conversation to the side. So let me bring a leader. This can help us make it practical. So don't have to worry about knowing everything that this profile talks about, but this is what gets opened up in the leadership circle profile. So I'll just give you a little bit of what's operating from a place of context and also a little bit of what this profile, leadership circle profile, speaks to. So this leader is a leader in actually a finance organization. And in that finance organization, this leader was deemed as extremely successful, someone that maybe even others could aspire to become. And what some of this profile is talking about is that they're showing up in a creative pattern. Some of those things that show up in this creative top path is my ability to show up in creative relationship, ability to show up self-aware, authentic, be able to see the system and being able to achieve. What was also happening for this leader in this bottom half was that their experience is highly controlling at times. So there's this level of high drive, high ambition. I will win, but I will win at all costs. High drive. No one can outwork me. And on the bottom left, they're also sometimes very likable, but also seen as what is your real way of thinking? Because sometimes you change your opinion based on who you're talking to, which gave them a little bit of a higher score in pleasing. In conversation with this leader individually, as we went through the results, they went, okay, makes sense. Maybe I don't have to do too much because it's working. Tried to dig in, but there was also lots of stories of it was working. It was fine. There's a good amount of people just experiencing this leader as effective. Now, within that, leaders bring the weather. What can sit underneath leaders bring the weather is another concept of being exposed at scale. So this leader was successful to the point that they are given 4 revenue streams. This was them at 1 revenue stream. Given 4 revenue streams, this is the next profile. So that controlling kicks up, some more of that protecting, and one of those protecting that really picks up is this note in distance. How much I put almost a shield between who I really am and who you know. And also big levers in complying. So jump into chat. What might be some of those things as they picked up 4 revenue streams of why that makes sense and what's the weather they're bringing as they picked up these 3 additional revenue streams? Higher control, higher protecting, higher complying. Stress tends to be it all. Overwhelm? Absolutely. What an overwhelmed survival moment. Yeah, what else? Stressed. More pressure created, more reactive tendencies. Absolutely. Those reactive tendencies can come so strong on here. Let me help you survive by working harder. Let's make sure you're not too visible, give you some more distance. And let's make sure you key new underneath it and that you can see that in the self-assessment, matching and complying. I might not be as well liked as everything's going poorly. How do I manage being likable? From leadership to management, 100% that also happens. Communicating reactively, then proactively and intentionally with the team, 100%. Not a lot in the team willing to speak up with additional or new ideas. True. So what happened? I'll open this back up into just being able to see each other. I opened up the call with the second feedback on the leadership circle profile, and he opened up the call with, Tyson, I just need to tell you, I had to do this before I start talking about it. So, all right, tell me. I'm always curious to hear more. And what they had talked about was what I had learned as I picked up 4 revenue streams is that everyone was a poor performer and I had to do it myself. And in having to do it myself, I also had to make sure that they liked me while I did it myself. Everyone likes me while I did it myself. What kind of weather does that bring to that team? So that he picked up a good amount more of people that reported to him. What's the weather for his people that he brought? Atlas complex, distrust. Control freak, not empowered, low confidence. That was a really big note underneath that, Mimi. That low confidence, isolation and lack of development, undervalued employee, lack of capabilities have to be acknowledged. Yeah, it's true. And how he sat with the team on lack of capabilities was a high control, high pleaser. No trust the team members, does not empower others to do things. Yeah. We had a lovely conversation. So what we opened up was just a couple of concepts to some of the earlier notes of what does it mean to shift from that reactive to creative. Let's jump back in. Lovely notes. Please keep them coming. He was faced in this moment with really 2 important choices. One was to face the reality of the situation. And this choice can be painful for many, many reasons. Leaders bring the weather. 2, which is a lovely one, ramp up our delusions. We can have a great skill at avoiding the full reality. So the opening moment of Tyson, I had to do this, had kernels of truth, but also ramped up delusion that it was everybody else's fault. What sat underneath that for that leader on the facing the reality was that he didn't know how to lead that many people. And so the levers he pulled on were the ones that worked when he had 1 revenue stream. Higher control, be likable, but now give me 4 and I amplify my reactive tendencies to try to survive. So a couple of key moves in this move from, yes, reactive is not the worst part, but it also brings lots of cost if I lean onto it as my only mechanism, was starting with self-awareness. So this leader had to go pay attention for a little bit, because the first move is not to just go and fix. Reactive loves fixes, but when we move from fix as our first move, we tend to fix the wrong thing or only fix something for a little bit and then go back to the pattern. So it didn't feel good. It's noticing what's creating the pattern. What am I experiencing right now? What pressure is present externally and internally? What weather patterns am I creating or reinforcing? How this opened up at the end of our conversation was just go take this for a walk for a little bit and come back. We came back in 2 weeks and they said, Tyson, I saw it. So what happened this week was I received a call from my boss just around checking in around the sales numbers for one of my revenue streams. And I saw myself almost cancel all of my strategic meetings that day to go and shadow my people in that revenue stream so I could see how the sales calls were going. Cancel all leadership meetings and shadow those that were actually at skip level to shadow their sales calls. That's what felt like a move to get informed. And Tyson, if I would have done that, I noticed I would have created everything that I got my feedback on about being controlling, stepping in, and creating a space of low trust. And also, I would have lost my ability to operate in a place of strategy and vision. Canceling all of my leadership team meetings, Tyson, that would have been the worst thing I could have done. But all of my habits told me I had to do that because I received the scary email from my boss of saying, how's XYZ revenue stream doing? So the first key move in this move from reactive weather pattern to creative weather pattern is awareness, which sounds so silly and actually can be really frustrating if we're in it because we have to slow down because awareness opens up more time for step one or choice one, to be with the pattern. But if we can be with the pattern, awareness precedes choice, meaning we're able to look at the choices that we are up to. And if we can get into our choices, then choice can precede change. Another topic that we discussed together was what does it mean to hold tension through the storm? So it can feel like a leader needs to solve for the tension, but leaders are very typically stretched across what it means to hold purpose and vision and also face the current reality. Where are we at right now? Where do we need to be? And then trying to solve for that tension, we can actually lose that tension. Leadership is holding that tension. Where are we and where do we need to be? So for this leader to actually hold the tension, allows them to open up some things that are not possible if I let go of this tension. So as we hold, moving from that reactive weather pattern to a creative climate, we can move from urgency to purposeful operation. So this is not the opposite of urgency. What we can hold sometimes is creative and reactive as opposites. Creative just holds a container for what our reactive is worried about. So being able to hold that things are urgent, but can we hold the urgent with purpose? So we're taking purposeful operation from a place of urgency. Instead of going into control, can I go into involved trust? What I see for the second point for leaders trying to move from a place of fix or reactive is they go from control to passive and call it empowerment. Because that feels like the fix. Okay, I'm too involved. Go for it. But involved trust is you don't lose me as your leader, but I trust you. Moving from a place of protection to a place of openness and collaboration. So there's a two-way street in how we can operate. Moving from pleasing to loving conflict. And this one, I almost edited it about 10 times, but I kept it on purpose. It's not that I love conflict, I have love through the conflict. So I have conflict, but with connection. So pleasing tends to hold things back on what we really need to talk about, but I can be lovely to be with. Loving conflict are some of the best, and typically the best relationships we have, where we can have some conflict, but there's a form or a relationship currency that sits underneath that. From winning at all costs, and winning is needed to keep the lights on, but moving from winning at all costs to learning and vision. So how do I hold things as they move with some learning capabilities, with some vision? So if we had that moment where it felt like a loss, if I'm winning at all costs, a little bit of a loss can feel like a devastating, most scary thing in the world. But if I can hold that with some learning, all right, what do we want to learn from that? And vision, something that's greater on the time horizon than the immediate moment, then how do I take that loss? Great leadership starts with self, meaning I'm not the greatest. It means I am the first project. So for the leaders that are opening up into chat in times of transition, or just leaders in general without transition and complexity is happening, how can we start with ourselves as the first project? What comes up? I'll pause for a little bit, jump into chat. What comes up for you as we're just looking at this together? Yeah, would love to have a culture where vulnerability is recognized. Important, important context. Yeah, courage and candor along with vulnerability and humility. I am the project. Yeah. Creative is more inclusive, not being afraid of failure, leading from the rear. Be the change and own that you are human when interacting with those you lead. Yeah. Yeah, your state comes first before strategy. Yeah, Deborah, I love that note of how hard is it to prevent defensiveness in some individuals. You won't be able to prevent all of it, right? That leadership holds space for that defensiveness will come up. And what's my authorship in that? Because if I'm not up to my own work, seeing defensiveness might engage my own defensiveness or aggression. Say, I'll let me break down those walls, being able to hold some of that defensiveness with something a little bit greater. Yeah, I love that, Neil. Yeah, it seems so obvious yet so counterintuitive in the moment because reactive is so good at keeping us alive. And we've developed those pathways so deeply that it can almost feel like there is no other way in that moment. So, back to this leader, some of the key conversations for them was what would it mean to trust, still keep their mind on the team needed to be developed, but it wasn't up to their own muscle to get it across the finish line. The thing that resonated with them the most for them was what would it mean to live like their leaders live without a leader that was leading purpose and vision and strategy and fostering an environment for collaboration. Because what they were experiencing was either someone that would take over or someone that was a people pleaser. So their key focus areas was to a note that I love that they came up with this was let go or be dragged. That was a note, little sticky note for themselves. So they felt like they had to be the one to get it across. It was all them energy, grit. Let go or be dragged. And the other note for them was what have my best relationships looked like, which was true collaboration. So those were their key points. This was their next profile on feedback a year and a half later. So I'll bounce back and forth just a little bit. So controlling, again, that bottom right tends to be I'll lead from a place of harder, faster, stronger. I'll have to control. I am my results. Distance tends to be I'll keep a wall between who I really am and who you know. Pleasing tends to be in that passive belonging. Pleasing is I'm okay as long as the relationship is okay. Do you like me? To this. Yeah, same people. From this one to this one. That's those 4 revenue streams. What stands out to the room? Jump into chat. How did he do it? Yeah, I love it. How did the results change? Fun, control with totally almost a non-existent. Yep. Learn how to lean into his creative. Yeah. This was a year and a half later. Wild gaps in self and others. There was that was the next edge, right? Yeah. Person happy. Yeah, I'll jump into that after a little bit more chat. Just bouncing between the two. What moves feel like they're visible? For those that know the leadership circle profile, jump in. For those that don't necessarily know it, some of those moves in that top half are around relating, self-awareness, authenticity, systems awareness, and achieving. Yeah, how does he do it? Okay. Good energy and question around this. The One of the key notions across reactive and creative, reactive does not scale very well to the results that are demanded. Creative tends to hold complexity and scale to meet the challenge. Because of this, high control, let me do it all was not scalable, was on the brink of a full mental and health breakdown. To that question of was this leader happy? People actually talked about this person in terms of I'll make up a name on the spot. New Tyler and old Tyler. So old Tyler was exhausted, burnt out, easily frustrated, and then would check out. New Tyler, and holding this tension of where we are, where we need to be, was able to help hold things from a place of purpose and vision, helping others capture the vision of what needed to be reached across the revenue streams. Was also able to be deeply connected in collaboration, because collaboration also takes some conflict. And so that collaboration, this leader, what was the name I made up? Tyler. What happened was it was Tyler's way or no way in this first time. Tyler's way held vision and purpose and then got feedback in from others because they were closer to the clients in those revenue streams than he could ever be. So what scalable leadership happened here was from operating from a place of purpose and vision, and you don't have to worry about being able to read this, but the feedback by others was near the 98th percentile in purpose and vision. And then the feedback of others and collaborator was near the 90th percentile. And then the interpersonal intelligence, which is about knowing people and having healthy conflict, was around that 95th percentile as evaluated by others. I've had leaders open up these calls when we look at their feedback before they've ever looked at it before and say, Tyson, are you here to just tell me why I suck? And it usually comes from a place of just wanting to laugh a little bit. And it's such a good opening, just have fun for a second. But where I usually land with the leader is, we're here to help you lead with less energetic effort. What this can feel like is almost like shifting. If anyone's ever driven a stick shift of a car, trying to drive on the freeway in third gear. I might be able to keep up with all the cars around me, but usually that engine's really, really loud, and it might have its break point coming up. To actually realizing there's a fifth gear. So it's not about how hard I push down that pedal anymore. It's shifting my system to hold a higher speed at less energetic effort. And it's not about just running faster or pushing my foot all the way down on that pedal anymore. So to shift the weather in real time, pause, name the pattern, locate the need, which is what is the situation really asking for, and then operating from a place of purpose and choice. So how leaders scale to positively impact the weather through their leadership is starting with self as the project. Develop your team and your team. So what this next move for them as they moved into a place of purpose and vision was to develop their leaders around purpose and vision and collaboration and connection, making sense of the reactive. And then it echoes out. Weather patterns invite weather patterns. So what weather pattern am I creating? And speaking about what weather patterns we create, here's a little bit of research that Leadership Circle Profile has done around those that tend to score in that top of the creative and those that tend to score more reactively, and did a little bit of a gap analysis around what are some of the real thematic differences of those scoring more creative versus those scoring more reactive. I love this, Boris. As I just want to pause because it's so good. And communicate openly our intentions can also help create context to some reactions that as leaders we'll also go through 100%. So you'll still be human. So that distance edge for that leader, they didn't let anyone know about their intentions because they were terrified about letting people in. So they let them in as they're trying to hold purpose and vision collaboration. So thank you for calling that out. I'm so glad we didn't miss that. So not leaving that gap. So just a few more minutes here before we open up in just a Q&A. What stands out to you when you see some of the thematic differences? What kind of weather pattern? If you were to almost describe the two weather patterns between the high creative and high reactive. Positive growth. What else? Yeah, interesting, right? Relationally driven. Yeah. Creative leaders are a lot more relational. Stormy versus sunny, stress versus calm. What we're most scared of is often where we have strength. If we're willing to be vulnerable, love that. Yeah. Self-awareness and engaging others to scale, openness, empowerment where possible. I love that note. Yeah. Where possible, trust, unlock potential, feeling of realization. Very, very good. Yeah. And these creative, those that score creative, you'll connect with them and you'll feel how human they are. They're not untouchable. They're very human. So they'll still have those moments of fear, uncertainty, but how do they hold those moments of fear and uncertainty? What beliefs are they holding as they walk into those uncertain moments? People and team is essential. Nice. Transitioning from a highly technical role to a leadership is difficult since it requires untapped, underdeveloped, or missing people skills. 100%, which underneath that is our consciousness as we work with people. Motivation, good. Yeah, trust grows when leaders are willing to be vulnerable and employees feel genuinely heard, then they're willing to work harder for leaders. Yes, leadership with less effort, because it can feel as we start to shift into trust like the most risky or awful thing. But if we do it in the right way of holding that weather pattern correctly, the ROI that everyone gets on that, and it can be different for different people, but the ROI that different people get is massive. And then also the ROI for the organization is massive. So I'm sure all of us can tap into a moment where we have worked somewhere where we hated where we were. Might have checked the box for that day. But if we were to be really honest with what was inside of that box, I'm working from a place of where we just despise or feel unsafe versus what we did inside of that box when we feel trusted, empowered, but present leadership. And the weather pattern is very different. How we check that box for what we put into that box is very, very different. Yes, and then there's honest feedback. How amazing is that for a system to have honest feedback? When the weather is setting up a place for open feedback, how powerful that can really, really be. So as we bring this to a close and we'll open up Q&A, you are always bringing weather. So a consistent conscious practice is to ask, what weather are you bringing today or in this moment or in this time? And what weather would you want to bring to your people? And let that be intention of where you are and where you need to be. It doesn't need to be invincible. And as the context changes, I love that note, Stefan. As the note changes, the context changes. What's my weather as that context shifts? And that weather pattern might be required to be different in a different context. but there is awareness into choice, into change. Underneath all of that is authorship. When it comes to weather or how we show up, one of my favorite things to ask myself and the leaders I'm with is, are you working it or is it working you? Are you working it or is it working you? And there's no right or wrong side to fall in that equation. It's just to ask underneath intention and consciousness of the weather that we're bringing. Okay. Wonderful to be with everyone. Sarah, how would you like to jump into Q&A?
Well, we've got a couple, Tyson. Honestly, I don't want you to stop talking. This has been really a wonderful conversation, and I think you're doing a lot of inspiring. And the chat has just been lively and so rich. It's great to see. But there was some energy when you were on the shifts slide, when you were moving from one to the other. There was some energy around. But how do you do it, especially when there's a time crunch, when you've got quarterly reporting or some sort of deadline or some sort of, milestone accountability hanging over your head? Like, how do you implement these kinds of step or choice one shifts when you're kind of behind the eight ball?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the things that can happen, especially in a leader's ears, because we're all up to pressures, is it can start to feel like an either or system of either operate from a place of purpose or operate from a place of immediate. It's the ability. One of my favorite concepts of the move from reactive to creative is this concept of transcend and include, meaning I'm able to grab what has worked around the react and deploy it from a creative structure. So it doesn't lose sense of the urgency of the now, but I also hold the container for what will be next. Because what can happen in a reactive pattern is it's called an oscillating cycle. It's a repeating pattern that we get stuck in the loop of the forever urgent and the forever, I have to do this right now. One of my favorite stories comes from a room that we were in around this, and the whole leadership team was talking about firefighting. We have to be firefighters. We have to fight the fire that's in front of us. Great conversation around the problems that were right there. And then one person that was relatively new in the room, which was a brave moment for them, they just raised their hand and held it for a second. And then the room slowly dialed into that this person was raising their hand. They said, I know I'm a little bit new here. They jumped in. And they said, I'm a former fire chief. And is it okay if I jump in just a little bit around this firefighting conversation? Because the way that they were holding it is we have to fight the fire in front of us or we'll all lose everything. Firefighters, I get where people are coming from, but can I bring up something for my people and for her when she talked about it? She said, if I didn't get my people to consider the fire behind the fire would always win and we would lose people.
Wow.
So you need to think about the fire beyond the fire. And so that expanding of a container that can hold the current and the extended.
Ma'am.
Effective. That's really good. Okay.
Ma'am.
So, all right, Tyson, there was another question Christina asked at one point. How do we learn to be open and not be defensive, but also not be pleasing? This idea of kind of walking that fine line and really navigating all the demands and the reactive patterns that can show up.
Human. Yes. Yeah. Very human. I think that part of that is knowing your own stories, knowing your own pattern of how you show up as defensive. Because if we were to really extend beyond the defensive self, I have to know what engages that deepest version of self. The defensive, I mean. For myself, just to lead with story of self, if I sense that someone doesn't like me, then my internal alarms freak out. And if it feels like I can't make you like me, then I shut off and go defensive. So it's this dance between people pleasing and distant. But knowing the pattern helps me have flexibility in that pattern. So being able to have the depth of self-awareness to know your pattern and also your points that hook that reactive, because those reactive moves try to whisper to me to keep me safe and get results of either being likable or stay safe. It's this dance, and they both get safety. So to expand beyond that, I have to know that, but also hold on to something that feels greater than that worry, whatever that is. And one of those first moves for me, and I will always want coaching for myself across this as well, was when I was with a coach and they talked about what feels greater than that fear of not being likable. And what came up from that was honest relationship. And so for that edge of to not be defensive or be likable, I had to find a greater, Keegan and Leahy would talk about competing commitments from immunity to change. That underneath competing commitment kept keeping me from something from changing. So I had to find something that felt more powerful than the competing commitment.
Excellent. Um, how do you recover after maybe you've, as a leader, had a bad day and you realize that you've brought the bad weather?
Yeah. Well, I can first start with what might feel like what you want to do. What you might want to do is either pretend it never happened and hope people forget. You might want to tell yourselves all the reason why it was everyone else's fault, which is fun to be in for a second. It's nice to have zero accountability. What I found is the most powerful leaders that I have been with is when they have done something on a negative impact, they connect with either that room or the people as quickly as they can. To connect back into, hey, I don't think I showed up with my best self. Or, hey, I think I did this and I think it created that. I love the own it notes. Exactly. They lean in and own it. And then critical note is then they move towards making sure it's not in a full on repeating pattern. Because what can be frustrating for a team is the leader that shows up explosive and then apologizes, explosive and then apologizes. So has to feel like it has a growth trajectory to it underneath the vulnerability and the owning it.
Okay, this might be a last question because we're getting to 5 minutes to the top of the hour here. But if leaders are bringing the weather, and as you said, we're bringing the weather, we're bringing weather whether we know it or not, and whether we want to or not.
Yeah.
How? What's maybe one way that we can also be conscious of or be aware of, or prevent becoming sort of the barometer for everyone around us? And not just being conscious of the weather we bring, but also trying to manage the weather of others.
Hmm. Give me that one more time. I think if I were to jump in that, I might answer it the wrong question.
Okay. So being aware of our own weather is one thing. And if we're aware of that, then we're also aware that others are bringing weather to the room.
Yeah.
So as a leader, how can we avoid trying to manage all the weather, or,
right.
or just, avoid all those stormy patterns and erupting into some big weather event?
I'll give both pieces. Bringing the weather versus providing umbrellas. Yeah. One, when you're truly the leader of the room, you do have accountability for your impact on people. So you can't lose that. There is a reason why some leaders talk about leadership being lonely. There is quite the calling when we are called to be a leader. So there is still ownership across that. And people also own their own reaction. So it is what can feel like polar opposites, but it's a dance in the middle of knowing you own it, and also knowing you can't fully control, which is the hook that leaders can get hooked into, is I am the reason for your weather pattern versus I can impact your weather pattern. So this dance between authorship and then also not controlling of weather, but knowing that you own self and what can I do? What's my impact? What's the tone I am setting? And then also it's everybody else's fault or it's all my fault to not swing it all the full way. And so that lonely notice how much you have to hold, which is why I would invite the leaders I work with to find either peers you can connect to or a system you connect to, because you need fuel sources back in as you lead through tough moments.
Thank you. That is really insightful. I think others agree in the chat, also saying that's insightful. And I hate to say it, but we're going to have to wrap up there. We have 2 minutes to the top of the hour. So, Tyson, thank you so much for this conversation. It has been fascinating and wonderful. And thank you to everyone on the call for such a lively chat and for being so engaged. If you'd like to learn more about Leadership Circle and our assessments, or you just want to talk about how leaders affect the weather, let us know. You can type yes in the chat and we'll follow up directly, or visit the contact page on our website, and we'll reach out when you're ready. I invite everyone to join us next month for a conversation on how leadership scales from self to team to system. We'll be talking with Carolina Paez, president of Global Regions, Countries, and Community, about how leadership creates a ripple effect. You can check for the link. I think that'll be dropped in the chat here in just a second. Or certainly watch your inbox and Leadership Circle socials for details on that. One last thing, as soon as I'm finished talking, we're going to end the call and close the room. But remember that we've been recording, and in about a week or so, you'll receive an email with a link to that recording, as well as a summary of some of the key takeaways from today's discussion. And there were a lot of great takeaways, so I would definitely be on the lookout for that. And with that in mind, on behalf of Leadership Circle and our featured guest, Tyson Andrus, I'm Sarah, saying thank you once again for sharing a little bit of your day with us. Take care, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you so much. Lovely to connect with everybody.